Hi, and welcome to Data Futurology. In this podcast, we unlock the secrets, the tips, tricks, and mistakes of data science leaders from around the world. My name is Felipe Flores. I am a data science executive, and at the moment, I'm working in a healthcare AI company as head of data science. My guest today is David Hardoon, extremely popular leader in this space, extremely influential. And I love that one of his taglines is that he's been doing data from before it was cool. He has such an amazing track record, incredible experience. He's taught at universities, he's worked in finance, he worked at central banks in Singapore, and at the moment, he is the senior advisor for data and artificial intelligence at the UnionBank of the Philippines. A huge role, and it was so exciting to get to speak with somebody that had been, in academia, in central banks, in banking and finance, and at such a high level across the board. He's definitely able to see what's coming and be able to integrate the lessons from all his varied experience, and obviously make good impact with artificial intelligence and machine learning. It was an exciting conversation. I hope you enjoyed. Here is David Hardoon. David, thanks so much for making the time. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thank you for having me. I mean, all locked in as everyone else, but doing very good.
Very, very glad to hear it. I love that on your LinkedIn, you have as part of your tagline, you have doing data before it was cool, working in data before it was cool. I love it. When I saw that,
thank you. I get a lot of flack. I get a lot of flack on that one and on data artists. But I thought, look, I need to own it. Just need to own it. I was called a geek many times in my life, so I'm gonna own it now.
I love it, and you can't escape the truth, right? You have been working in data from before it was cool, so I think very, very fitting. So I did want to start by asking you about your origin story. So how was it that you first got interested in data? What was it that pulled you in? What are some of the early memories that you have about the field?
Okay, now I'll show you how much of a geek I really am. So actually, this all happened when I was in high school, believe it or not. I got sent, I may have been punishment. I can't think of another reason being at the school library, but I ended up kind of finding a book on Prolog, logic programming language. And I just said, okay, nothing else to do. Started reading it, and what is this thing? What is this Prolog stuff? And I absolutely fell in love. Maybe that was my first love. And this whole idea of that you can, program logic, expert systems, and one can argue whether it's data science or machine learning, but something, put that aside. It's this whole idea about the ability of using information, using data as mechanisms to aid us on a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of when I really fell in love with it. And I decided I want to go into this. I want to do this. I want to explore what are the possibilities and how to help, basically, in the end of the day.
That is awesome. And then where did that lead you in terms of studies and early career? What did that look like from after high school?
So after high school, again, geek, I had two choices in my academic route. So one is artificial intelligence. However, there wasn't any degree that actually was artificial intelligence back then, and astrophysics. And my mother very nicely, I should say, said, son, please choose a career that will allow you to do more than in academia. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love astrophysics, wanted to do that. So I ended up finding a place which had a combined degree of computer science and artificial intelligence. And in fact, I was the second student. This was back at Royal Holloway, University of London. And again, it was an absolute joy, because I kind of realized very early on in the kind of being a student that, and in fact, this is very much representative of how it is in business now. data science, machine learning, AI, whatever you want to call it, is this hybrid of different disciplines.
Yes.
And I did that, ended up, was .com, not boom, bust. Got the opportunity to continue doing a PhD. And I realized that, you were sitting next to people who one was genuinely a nuclear physicist, neurologist, linguist, and you realize that it's these different dimensions, these different problems, all looking at data effectively as a means to identify a solution effectively. So really dived into that, spent probably far too long a time in the world of academia, researching, and don't get me wrong, absolutely love it. However, I wanted to bridge the gap between theory and practice. I wanted to see it applied and making a difference. I may not have been entirely, perhaps through my own fault, and entirely persuaded by the whole money aspect of it, but it was about the applied aspect of it.
Wow.
Can this make a difference? And I truly believed it can.
That is fantastic. So, and then once you made the leap into industry, what were some of what were the first few years like for you? What surprised you, and what were you working on, and what did you learn?
Yeah. Well, let me start off. Actually, if you don't mind, I'll give you a bit of a side story that I remember my very first interview. Walk in, having a loving conversation, and when they said to me, "Oh, you have a PhD?" And I said, "Yes." And they went, "Oh." And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why they reacted that way. However, once I went into industry, and you'll see why I'm giving you this segue, I kind of realized that very, very quickly that what you may focus on, what you may appreciate from a theoretical point of view, from a conceptual perspective, maybe to a certain extent different in what's necessary on an applied development point of view. And I still remember one of my very first engagements in industry. In fact, it was in the financial sector, which I now find myself back in. I was asked to go explain optimization, and if you don't mind, I'm actually happy to show you the use case that we did. But I was asked to go explain optimization to the business, and I'm, of course, just fresh off the boats, academic. Yeah, I'll be happy to explain optimization. And let's just say it didn't go quite as I had anticipated. And that to me was my rude awakening from the academic to applied side of the house, that the the objective is, how do you take these very complex ideas or these very complex methodologies and explain them in very simplistic, very pragmatic, very relatable terms, rather than showing who's the smartest person in the room. So to me, it was a world-shattering kind of revelation. But in fact, I've kind of, whether one can call it, build my career on that objective, on how to simplify things and use them. If I may, I would love to tell you the use case that I did. Really, this to me was like I call it my fire bath into the world of industry. Was a very real operational problem that a bank, in fact, was facing when it came to cash. Now, it's something that none of us really think about on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, since it was first invented, I think in the 1950s, an ATM, cash dispensing machine, haven't really fundamentally changed in their function. They may look prettier, but they haven't changed. And the problem that institutions face on a regular basis is, how do we make sure those machines are topped up in cash, so that when you go to and withdraw money, it actually has money in it, rather than the case of, sorry, cash out, go find another machine. Now, so you're trying to deal with a customer satisfaction issue. You're trying to deal with a supply issue and identifying when are these things going to happen. And then the second important element is how much money to put in. So it was, if you think about it, it's a very real, very operational problem that is dealt with on a day-to-day basis. And it was a absolutely perfect case of applying the world of AI and data science, because data science and AI is all about identifying patterns, foretelling certain outcomes. And what we kind of realized very quickly, that however much people may think that people are unpredictable, we actually are. And it was possible to create these forecasting models to identify exactly how much money in the future is going to be depleted from the machine, which then allowed to build these very, well, I won't say sophisticated, but robust optimization routines that were able to tell the bank in advance where to replenish and how much to replenish, and even to a certain degree say when are the machines likely to cash out, to break down as well as cash out. So it was very real. And when I was initially brought in, that was a segue. The way it was explained to the bank, the way it was explained to the end users was a very technical jargon. Oh, let me talk to you about these ARIMA and forecasting methodologies and how we backpropagate them and how we test them. And the guys in the business was like, huh? Yeah, what? I don't care about that. I don't care. Tell me about how is this going to make a difference? So that was to me that awakening of like, oh, actually, you don't care about the math.
But I find it fascinating that from that, I find it fascinating, and I love the fact that from there you chose simplicity and applications as kind of like important steps to continue through with throughout your career. And I'm sure that these two have been reinforced over time to continue to simplify, continue to seek application.
Can I?
Why?
I just want to jump in and maybe because I know we're going progressively in the timelines, but I want to jump actually to now, and then we can go backwards to further emphasize that important. Because don't get me wrong, we have many smart people out there with extremely innovative solutions. But it is that simplicity that matters. And I'll give you an example of right now. So UnionBank of the Philippines, where I am, we're using data, digitalizing, really kind of crossing boundaries. But at the same time, you have a concept which is bank on wheels. So you are digitalizing, you are making sure that you have all of these online capacities, leverage that, but at the same time, you're taking the simplistic concept of putting a bank on wheels and bring it to people who need it, because it's that realization of well, they need to have the access to the bank. They need to have an access to those services. So it's keeping solutions pragmatic, catering to the needs, at the same time driving for that innovation and digitalization. So I just want to give you an example from how it started and an example of it is now.
But man, that is so impressive, because so many of us fall into the trap of trying to solve for the world that we would like, how we would like it to be. And obviously in that case, people in data, because of our background, we think of digital solutions and give me all the data I can capture. But it's so important to meet the customer need where that need exists. And in this case, the bank on wheels, that's phenomenal. And being able to do both is even better. How did you guys get to tackling both sides of the coin at the same time?
Well, like I mentioned, it's on the one hand the necessity of tackling the problem of digitalization, making sure that accessible effectively is anywhere at any point in time, that the bank is digital. And as a testifier of that, of doing that capacity, I mean, we're all now experiencing COVID, is that ultimately, it was business as usual. Even though that I think, if I'm not mistaken, 90% of the workforce is at home. But you can't forget the fact that while we want to achieve, and in fact, in your own terms, we want to achieve a certain outcome, we have a certain vision. Data is a journey, and we need to remember the term journey. And not everyone is able to go at the exact same pace on that underlying journey. So while we're driving for that agenda and we are achieving it, how do you make sure that no one is left behind? And that's where the concept and the idea came of Banco Weep by saying, look, they can't have that digital connectivity for whatever reason. We go to them effectively during that process effectively. So, and just kind of winding back, it was really kind of, and personally to me, as someone who kind of does data, it was that original kind of appreciation of the necessity of simplicity while not foregoing ambition and drive. Put aspirational goals. But at the end of the day, what is important the criteria as a data scientist is it has to be pragmatic, because otherwise it is research, which is all good. I guess I came from research. I enjoy research. But when it comes to an industrial use, at least in the banking world, there are really only four dimensions. It's either helping in the bank in customer service, increasing revenue, reducing costs, operational, managing risk, or compliance. So really delivering that value that one stands behind. Otherwise, if we're just playing around with data, we may unwittingly result in a situation that we're churning water. No, because let's think. I'll give you an example. When I was still back in research, I would spend at times, actually one in particular that comes to mind. It was a project on learning the relationship between brain patterns and musical patterns, both being data. Mm-hmm. It's a multi-year journey that sometimes you spend 7 months on one component of that problem.
Exactly, and in that case, the researcher, loves the challenge, loves following their curiosity, following the bouncing ball, and I think that's why it's sometimes difficult for people to make the transition to industry and rewire their approach as they do that. And what do you have any tips for people coming from research into industry, and what are the type of timelines to expect in industry from your perspective? Something for people coming in from research.
I do. And again, having been one of those, I definitely do. And in fact, I would say that I have, I don't know if the word is recommendation, or at least a view, both to those who are coming into the world of industry from the research side, but equally to the industry that is welcoming the researchers in.
Yes.
It needs to start off with an alignment of expectation. An alignment expectation of what is the purpose? Is the purpose to do research? Then it's an understanding of, okay, perhaps from a researcher point of view, there's slightly less, one should call a change, because it's still research, it's still maybe blue sky, exploratory nature. But then from an industry perspective, there needs to be the appreciation that you may not have an immediate ROI, if one is even quantifiable. Yeah. However, equally at that setting of the expectation, if the agenda isn't research or is light research, but resulting in demonstrable, actionable items, and like I mentioned, those, as I call my 4 KPIs of outcome, it's important that there's a bit of a transition period for those of research that, okay, what is that it needs to be changed? How does it need to change? In terms of expectations, effectively, in terms of timelines, in terms of deliverables. I don't know if the word is the curse that a lot of times researchers fall into, again, myself included, is we're researchers. We're trying to drive for that 99%, the 90%, the 98%. We're trying to constantly drive for that better algorithm, for that better accuracy. However, if I flip it around and I come to you and I'm saying, I'm getting 60% accuracy, or 62% accuracy over the 58 that you currently have as a baseline. From a researcher mindset, you're like, well, 62, that's horrendous. We must do better than that. But maybe that 62, that 4-point delta is equivalent to $500,000, $5 million, $10 million in terms of impact to the business. So if when you translate it to dollars and cents, well, quite frankly, do we care that it's 62? So what does that 62 mean? So that is the connectivity back that researchers at times have to change, is how do we bring it back to the practicalities of what is it trying to do? Secondly, is being a bit of like, I always forget what they're called, what horses have, or the visors on the side. Whereas in research, you're encouraged to have this very, very broad perspective and to kind of bounce around. At times when you have to deliberately require the necessity of like, okay, I see that to be very interesting, but no, let me get this done. Let me focus on this. I will get back to that later on. Be very focused.
Yes, that's such an interesting point. And how do you think we're managing, how do you think that as an industry, how are we managing the different requirements for the different roles? So I've seen that in some places there are new titles appearing that shows a more specialized approaches to the responsibilities of each data scientist or person in the team. How do you see that evolution? Do you think that we're giving people in our teams and our industry enough clarity around the expectations of their roles?
I'm actually I'm welcoming of this step in evolution to a certain degree on the definitions, because prior to that, everyone and anyone were called data scientists. And I personally had a bit of an aversion to the term for two reasons. One, kind of half joking, because every scientist uses data, even philosophers. And the second one, aversion, is it's just too generic. And what is a data scientist? And in fact, when you dive into the role of a data scientist, you in fact it's a multitude of personalities. It's a multitude of individuals. The person who's more of the business orient, who understands enough of the science, but is aligned to the business and can translate it to the engineers, maybe use that term, as well as communicate the outcomes back to the business. You have another one who's the visualizer, who does the data storytelling. Then you have, as I mentioned earlier, the bona fide scientists who are really thinking about the methodologies, the algorithms, the approach. And then you have the data science engineers who need to build it in a robust fashion that can be deployed in a business in the end of the day. So you see there's many, many, many different dimensions to it. And I believe that now this teasing out also helps in individual growth. What are the more specific skill sets that I need to be successful? And also, back to our earlier point that we were discussing, helps in clarity. So for example, if I take now, again, not that I'm saying that they can't, but just as an oversimplistic example, if I take a data science engineer who has the capacity from a data-centric point of view, from extract, transform, load, all the good technical stuff, and you're expecting them to do the more research element. Don't get me wrong, they may excel, but it's a different perspective, and vice versa. I mean, that was one of the biggest challenges. If you look at the attrition rate of data scientists, we've got a whole bunch of researchers. However, what we truly expected from them was to be engineers. And data scientists, those researcher data scientists, no, I'm not here to build you an ETL code or to build you a data warehouse. Give me data, I explore, see feasibility, and then you go and implement it. So there's a lot of disconnect to a certain degree.
There is, and definitely, and I think that the fact that the industry is maturing, going from the big hype that we saw, and now getting a better understanding, and that there is kind of like more specialized roles being available. I think it's a positive step for the industry overall, because as I completely agree with you that the fact that a scientist is so broad. That's why there's so many people trying, and for years I found people were trying to demystify it and asking, what is it that a scientist? What do they do? And it's because there's so much that is covered by that term. So it's really a team sport.
It is. It's a team sport,
not an individual effort.
And it's a team sport, and it's also it's a team sport internally, and it's a team sport externally. And it is just like a business. You need to be attuned to your customer's need and what is it that they're trying to achieve. And let's use that broad term, data scientist, you need to be attuned to what your business needs and how best to help bring everyone on that journey forwards in fulfillment. And equally, and while I would say, quite biased to the adoption and the use of data, I'm a true believer that these techniques can extremely help in the achieving the visions that one kind of puts in forward. We need to also equally realize where data isn't relevant. I mean, we have many cases whereby good old judgment is perfectly well, decision rules. A process is what's required. So I like to think, maybe it's because I used to love Lego as a kid. Think of data science as a Lego, and it's identifying amongst all the pieces that are out there how to build it. But most importantly, there needs to be that concept of what is it that we're trying to build.
And having that the clarity of the outcome that is being pursued and how the outputs are going to be used is so important, because it just drives all of the work. And I definitely see that's one of your focuses. So I wanted to ask you as well, how in your approach, actually, before we go into the simplicity, I wanted to finish your story, your journey.
Sure.
I like the fact that you're going full circle from finance to back to finance. But tell us a little bit about what happened in between.
Sure. Okay. So I was kind of, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I kind of did a round tour. So I touched the world of data through software, through consultancy, through services, through being in-house. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, on one hand, people say, "Oh, David, you can't make up your mind what you want to do." But in fact, to me, it was the exact contrary. It was, I want to have the understanding and appreciation of those different dimensions, such that at the very least, it's easier. I don't know if that's the right word. Easier to help bring them together, because a lot of times, what you find prevents the true fulfillment or the true adoption of data is that as simple as loss in communication. Different dimensions of those different aspects. Even because consultancy doesn't necessarily have to be external; it could be internal as well. Software development, business. We may be all speaking the same language, we may be all speaking about the same thing, but we're using different terms and different languages. So it's by having that kind of roundabout to a certain extent, the 360 view of data that has personally helped me in my journey have that kind of view and appreciation effectively. So it's literally that. And the example of finance happened to be when I was actually still in the software world, but kind of providing solutions to a financial institution back then. And this was quite a while ago. But kind of move from there to more services, move from there towards, as I mentioned, consultancy, moved in-house, and now very much being within a financial institution, UnionBank, in kind of bringing it together and supporting the agenda of making banking accessible. I think that's in the end of the day. And to me, nowadays we have a bit of a finesse of sticking the word AI on anything. To me, it's actually not something. Keep it in the engine, keep it underneath the hood. Because if, for example, you're able to provide accessibility to withdrawal of cash, so we're just talking about ATMs. So if you're able to provide accessibility to the people who need it, but rather than physically having to go to a machine through a mobile app, which, by the way, is exactly what we're doing, there may be sophisticated machine learning algorithms within it, but it is the application that's important. It is how it's surfaced in fulfilling that need effectively. Now, don't get me wrong, this is where things become more exciting and allows for opening that door of seeing what would be that next service, what would be that next possibility. And that's where data plays a very important role, because ultimately data tells us about behavior, and it tells us some of those wants when people don't come and explicitly say, I want that.
Exactly. It's instead of what people say, it's exposing what they actually do, and as you said, like what they want. Key point there. And I love the fact that you were choosing to explore multiple areas in the vast data world and obviously growing world, that you chose to look at different areas to get all those different perspectives. At what point was that At what point did that become a deliberate choice in how you were choosing and designing your journey? Did it start deliberate? Did it become deliberate at one point? Was there a moment that you realized that the benefits of what you were doing, or did you choose it ahead of time?
Oh, a very existential question. I would love to say that this was all designed and all strategized and all planned. However, I need to be honest, and it was a combination of coincidence, luck, fortune. But what I believe, and actually, again, I'm, I'm a data guy. Let me be geeky about data, is about identifying patterns.
Yeah.
And that's what I did to myself. I identified patterns. I identified the trajectory in which I ended up. I realized the merit within it. And I said, this is actually what I want. Because one of the biggest questions that a lot of data scientist people get, I get it many times, is, David, what do you want to do? What do you want to focus on? What is the area that you want to do? And I personally find that an exceptionally difficult question to answer, because the industry is almost a by the way. The application is almost by the way. Don't get me wrong, it is extremely important, but it's almost by the way, because the virtue of data is that it can be applicable and it can transcend any single industry. It can transcend any specific application if you're focusing on identifying patterns, identifying possibilities. So by taking that, kind of capitalizing on that, very quickly realizes that I wanted to have these different dimensions. I wanted to learn as much as possible. But of course, you have to be, again, pragmatic at some point, and decided to delve in and to the welcoming arms of UnionBank to apply it and really be part of that journey. Because again, and I don't speak with any ill, is there's a lot of hype around data. There's a lot of hype around AI. And it is important. And okay, let me first start by saying nothing wrong with having a bit of hype. I mean, we all like to get excited. But it is important to be able to be in a position, or at the very least have an attempt to explore it and say, look, these are genuine opportunities. We may not succeed as well as we wanted to, and that's part also of the journey of data, but taking kind of very strategic and very deliberate paths in materializing it. So finance happens to be, to me, and again, maybe it's because of a few years that I spent in a central bank, I came to the realization that no matter what industry you deal with, there is a commonality. Finance. I know this sounds kind of borderline theological or whatnot. Finance is the gel amongst anything, whether it's seashells for trading, or fiat currency or digital currency. It's still the financial mechanism that brings us all together. So it is, how do we help people in provisioning those services that they want and going beyond that effectively, and maybe being a bit aspirational, improving people's lives.
I could not agree more. The time that I spent about 5 years in finance, and what I always what I realize and what I would say to the team is that the finance is an abstraction of how the world works. When we were in the B2B side, and essentially when we were processing financial statements, we could look across any industry, across multiple countries, any economy, any products, and they all sort of came back to a common language in which we could analyze. And I always found that so interesting. And I wanted to ask you, with your work at the bank, what type of things are you currently excited about, or have been working on, things that you can share?
Sure. So one of the things that are definitely exciting me, and I think exciting many of us, is the whole aspect of digital banking, which UnionBank has been actually, in fact, one of the force driving in that. And a certain extent, and a bit of an irony, but the recent events with COVID that's kind of forced us all at home had, on the one hand, evidenced that necessity of provisioning the whole digital banking. And just to share, there's been a tenfold increase in digital banking customers since the UnionBank online offering has actually put in place. And since Philippines put in place what is called ECQ, enhanced container quarantine, I can't remember the exact terms. So since that has been put in place, equivalent to what Australia has done, there's been a 400% increase on those digital customers.
Wow.
So what really excites me is not only the fact that this journey had started before there was a pressing need for it. And I think that is a very important point, that we want to be able to put these foundational capabilities before there's a dire necessity for it. We want to identify these trends. We want to drive these values, these services, as early as possible and creating them. And this only proves that approach. So that's one. And then, of course, that creates the opportunities of how do we make sure we engage with our consumers, both online as well as offline. And it's understanding people, because the goal is providing service. It is being able to make the whole process of financial services banking a pleasant and enjoyable experience. And it is, and it can be. So this is definitely something that is, wonderfully exciting me. Beyond that, and that's part of the journey, is how do we bring the vast majority of those who are outside the banking system to the financial and banking system? How do we make sure that we are able to cater them and provide them that safety and assurity that ultimately the financial system and banking provides?
I really like the customer perspective that you take in your work. It comes through so strongly that you really care about the individual that's receiving the services, and not that even though you're a passionate data guy, you're not only focused on the data. Can you? Was there a period in your life, in your professional life, where that developed, or do you feel that it was something that was with you all along?
No, it has developed. It definitely has developed. I would say it had developed over the years, and again, coming from the academic aspect, but it was all driven with the question of so what. And obviously in research, it is slightly more light touch, because at the end of the day, the ultimate pursuit of research is to adding to the intellectual equity of us as people. So there may not be as somewhat immediately, but it may be something that can add for so what later on.
Yes.
However, as you can imagine, in the world of history, the so what is a slightly more cutthroat of why should I care about this? And that only further helped refine the necessity of this is valuable stuff and this is the so what, and how to at times reframe the picture to making sure there is a strong narrative and a strong angle. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, anything and everything we do is around a customer. And I use and again, I'm using the term customer slightly loosely, because a customer can be an employee, it can be a citizen, it can be an individual, as a retail customer, it can be a corporate. But at the end of the day, it's about a customer. And I think this is also, before the data renaissance to a certain extent, is also this kind of experience that the financial sector as a whole has gone over the last 2 decades, that we're moving away from product, and I'm pitching your product, to, well, what is it that you need? Because quite frankly, the intention is to be part of your life. Now, and let me give you a very realistic example of that. When you come to a bank and say, David, I need a loan. And I go like, okay, here's the kind of loan I can give you. This is the interest. But I need to stop and say, hold on a second, but why is it you need a loan? Are you starting a new business? Are you getting married? Are you having kids? Are you buying a second home? Is it in? And it is that essence, that why, that I think is what should drive data. And in fact, if I use that as a bit of a segue, I became a huge both supporter as well, just passionate on the whole aspect of behavioral science. So to add that as the breaking data science into smaller components, data science and behavioral science, which is meant to give us that better visibility as to why is this happening, why is this important, and then the full, multi-ton beast of data science can come and support by saying, I can build you the mechanisms, I can build you the rails, I can build you the capabilities, but it can be embedded into a reason. So it definitely had evolved with time.
So interesting. And how does it compare being inside a financial institution like you are now versus the being in a central bank?
Good question. The way it differs is, I think it actually doesn't. And I'll explain what I mean it doesn't. I'm very sure many of my colleagues out there in the financial world will kind of like take a little step back and say, well, David, are you sure? Well, the reason I say it doesn't is because, if anything, the time I spent with the regulator and central bank, because in fact they're both, was a more acute and refined appreciation for governance and a truly deep realization that governance isn't a hindrance for innovation. Isn't. And I truly can't emphasize how much I believe in that statement. In fact, I believe that governance is a instigator for innovation. And this is, in fact, truly what's also reflected by what we're doing in the bank, in UnionBank right now. We're exploring on how to bring hand in hand. So in this whole world of data science and AI, whereby we're still trying to explore and understand where and when does these components come in. So we're not just going down the path of adopting data, we're concurrently going the path of understanding the governance that is necessary within it, because we want to provide that trust, the equity of trust to consumers, as well as the equity of trust internally. We are part of the consortium that was started last year in November in Singapore. Actually, it's an international consortium called Veritas, which is really about identifying how to use AI in a proper manner, in a governed manner. And equally, we have internal initiatives to do exactly that. So that's why I said, actually, there isn't much difference. The only perhaps additional difference is, obviously, I'm slightly closer to the end consumers, the retailers, the corporates that we provide service to, and we want to make sure attaining the value of the digitalization journey that we're taking, because we're not just taking it alone, we're taking it with them.
That's right. So interesting. And so do you see that do you see governance as maybe as constraints that can fuel innovation, or how do you see the governance side being able to help innovation more and help create it? What's your perspective there? Sorry.
Governance, in my view, in my personal view, is a mechanism to allow us to identify what we should and shouldn't do. Some of that comes from, obviously, central banks and regulators, which are stipulated, having a larger economy, both from a systemic point of view in mind. Some of it is driven internally, a charter that one subscribes to. But at the end of the day, it is that. I mean, there are many, many things that we can do. At times, we need to challenge ourselves in the question of, should we be doing it? So ultimately, that is the purpose of governance. Governance is there to ask us that question. And that is exactly why I said that, to me, governance doesn't inhibit innovation. It drives it. Because ultimately, by having that framework, that approach, the embedding of governance, what it means is that we're innovating as much as possible. However, we are innovating safely, such that we know what will happen. And perhaps it's as simple as we're not quite ready for this yet. We need a bit more time. To, we see it, we value it. No, we don't believe in it. We just don't stand behind this.
That definitely adds a level of security that is very necessary in order to create the types of innovations that are required and that are needed in the world. I really like that perspective. Actually, that's really nice. And when it comes, so what are your views on AI, governing AI, and are there any initiatives that you are looking at or a part of or anything like that? And what is your perspective in general about? Obviously, there's been a lot of talk on governing AI.
Oh, absolutely. Well, at the risk of going into that depth of the AI governance debate. Oh, is it still recording?
Yes.
Philippe, can you hear me? Okay, my screen has frozen. Okay, as I was saying, at the risk of and deliberately avoiding that absolute depth, because obviously the whole topic of AI governance is an immense one. My view towards AI governance is, again, we need to align it to how and where it is being used. And what I mean is, because at the end of the day, AI is a tool, it's an engine, it isn't a construct on its own right. So, for example, AI is an engine within a loans facility. So, therefore, the governance isn't per se on the AI, the governance is with respect to how we distribute loans, which we have already governance with respect to that. However, nonetheless, it is absolutely important that from a governance point of view, the way we build the models, the way we validate them, those things are in place, and those things are absolutely already in place. Together with that, I was mentioning, we are, as part of the membership of the consortium, we are in continuous debates, discussions, with the research community, with other counterparts, in making sure that we're constantly at the absolute tip of the spear in terms of taking those considerations of the potential implications of AI. And I think this is where it is also important to take a realistic an open-minded approach towards AI, and we've seen the many cases out there. Again, we need to be just very pragmatic about it. We're doing it, and concurrently we have approaches that I'm looking forward to sharing more in the future of how we're making sure there are safeguards in place to, at the very least, when AI is misbehaving, that we are aware of that, and then at least it's a human judgment with respect to all other mitigating controls and governance in terms of controlling that. And this is true for anything, whether it is the more slightly dry topic, although personally I find it extremely exciting, of data governance, to process governance, to those certain applications. So to repeat, absolutely exploring the path of AI governance, but again, within context. I don't think we should be doing things for the sake of doing it. It needs to have tangible, demonstrable outcomes associated with it. And how is it going to be used? With that, making sure that there's a holistic and robust governance mechanism when these models are built, tested, validated. And concurrently, we are exploring continuous means of making sure there is those safeguards, those rails in place to let us know when AI may be slightly misbehaving effectively. Because like I said, in the end of the day, we need to trust it, and you need to trust us that we are trying our utmost best in making sure those things are in place.
I love it. That is a really, really pragmatic approach, and also really comprehensive. Really, really great. I wanted to ask you from a personal perspective, with all the different initiatives that you're working on, both in your role at UnionBank, but also with the boards that you're involved in, with universities, and all the extra work. How do you balance it all? Maybe not balance is the right word, but how do you get so much done? How do you work across so many different things?
Oh, I think if anything, it shows my my obsession on data and borderline workaholism. But no, jokes aside, at the end of the day, what I've kind of realized is, and I don't profess to be an expert in all those areas. I mean, there are some which I have a bit more of experience in, but definitely not an expert in all those areas. However, there is a commonality. The methodologies, the best practices, the non-best practices, the failures that have occurred, learning from those, the considerations are largely the same. If I'm truly, truly honest, they are largely the same. Naturally, how they may be applied in a specific context may differ. And this is exactly where I like to see myself interacting with these various bodies, is providing that view and triggering that conversation whereby it becomes an intersect between the world of data science, machine learning, and that specific world of the domain. Secondly, I personally value it, and in fact, I don't know if it's a recommendation for others, but the merit is the ability of understanding and appreciating how data science is applied in a specific context and borrowing that into another. Because the methodologies are largely the same, it may be triggered because of a specific problem in the world of whatever. And then you can go, well, hold a second, that is awesome. That is really, really awesome. While this particular domain, this particular area, loans, mortgages, credit cards, pension, whatnot, didn't have that same necessity as that one, I can apply it. And I can also get that kind of value that we didn't even realize could be achieved. Let's do that. So to me, it's that cross-fertilization that becomes exceptionally exciting. Data science, if there is the biggest shift between the traditional world of data and the new world of data science, is that mantra of moving away from silos to enterprise. And I'm sure you've heard this many times in many cases. In fact, this is usually the main concern that technologists, data science, even business people will kind of bring up and say, oh, we're stuck with silos. But that's exactly why we need to shift away from it, because it is that virtue of transcending areas, transcending domains, combining the data from different aspects to get a more comprehensive view, are exciting. Nonetheless, I want to just emphasize this, because at times when I get extremely excited about data, people, and I was kind of half expecting you to throw it in as well, but what about privacy? Absolutely. Privacy is a hygiene. And I want to make it clear that it is absolutely possible to achieve these possibilities while attaining privacy. You do not need to sacrifice it to be able to understand, identify patterns, predict, or analyze them.
That is phenomenal. David, that is a fantastic note to end on. I want to really thank you so much for your time. You are you're such an accomplished leader, and you're also so humble and so willing to share how you approach the world. It's really been an absolute blast to get to have a conversation.
Thank you for giving me an outlet, for sharing my little joy of data.
That brings this episode to conclusion. Thank you so much for listening. Please find us on datafuturology.com or on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram as Data Futurology. Also go to datafuturology.com/podcast to find the show notes for this and any other episodes. If you like this episode, it would mean a lot to us if you could leave us a review wherever you listen to our podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it was helpful and valuable for you. Thanks again, and see you next time.